and welcome to this edition of Hidden History Stories from the Secret City. I'm Keith McDaniel, along with my co host, Ray Smith. Good morning, Ray.
Good morning, Keith. How are you today?
I'm good. I'm good. Um, we got a special guest with us today that we both know pretty well, as a matter of fact. So why don't you introduce him?
Well, I'll be glad to introduce Steve Jones. You may have known Steve even longer than I have, so you may want to add to this introduction. But I've known him since he was involved with the city of Clinton and introducing the Clinton 12. That's where I got to know more about Steve. And then I've enjoyed and knowing what he's doing now with Oak Ridge. And oh, by the way, Steve likes to go to Alaska. And when he does, I'm always interested in the photographs that he takes when he's up there hunting, but he's having a good time on those trips. So, Steve, we're glad to have you with us today. And you know, the theme of our program is hidden history. So I'm anxious to hear some of the things that you can bring to us from your knowledge of the area and especially the area before Oak Ridge, if we could maybe start there. So anything to add, Keith, before we get rolling?
Nope.
All right.
Have at it.
Uh, all right. Why don't you, Steve, just start with us, talk about the Hall Ridge area and where the Jones family was before the Manhattan Project.
Okay. Well, first of all, it's great to see both of you. I worked very closely with both of you back during the Green Mcadoo project, which has been almost 15 years ago now, 15, 16 years ago since we started that project. And of course, we've known each other through ETech and other Oak Ridge organizations. And it's always a pleasure to work on any project with you, not just Green Mcadoo, but talking about history and all the great things that you guys are doing. I've missed seeing you the last year, and I'm looking forward to the time that we can all get back together and start reminiscing again. But yeah, so my Oak Ridge history is, I hear people talk about being native Oak Ridgers. I'm a real native Oak Ridger. My family, most of my family on the Jones side settled here after the American Revolution, Revolutionary War grants, the Waller. Some people may be familiar with the Waller Cemetery that's over in Roan Regional Industrial Park, and certainly Friel's Bend. My great-grandmother was a Friel's, born in the cabin there. And, I guess more recently, my family, my grandfather was born and all of his sisters were born there where Hall Ridge is. A lot of people know where the silos are. There was an old home place there. You can kind of see the remnants of an old cabin, some logs, some agricultural infrastructure. And my grandfather was actually born in that house prior to the Manhattan Project. If you go down the Hall Ridge Trail, there's a bend there where the old Edgemoor bridge used to cross the river, going towards the town of Edgemoor. And if you go, I've seen where people have gone up there on trails. And if you go up there on those trails, there's some remnants of another old farm place. There's some steps and old corrals and that kind of thing. That's actually where my great-great-grandfather lived. So we lived all up and down the valley, and I don't want to get into too much family history because occasionally it gets pretty close. Thank goodness for the Manhattan Project, because my mother's family, who's from Boston and Nashville, it was good to get that mix of people in here. The valley didn't let people move around as much as maybe they did in other parts of the country. But I grew up listening to stories of when the War Department came in and took the property from my grandparents and some of their neighbors that I knew growing up. And it was always interesting to me. And my grandfather was preparing to go to the Pacific and for the invasion of Tokyo. He was in the medical corps. My other grandfather was in the European theater, but I never heard, and I can just vaguely remember my great-grandfather. He died when I was maybe 4 years old. My great-grandmother died well before I was born. but I never really heard any resentment. I mean, it seemed like the people in the area were willing to make some sacrifice to get their, to get their boys home and end the war. And I don't know that they ever knew what was going on until after the war, but they knew it was for something big. And I've got actually have two great aunts that are still living. One of them's 100 and will be 102 or 103 in October. The other one's 90. I think she's 92. Both of them remember everything vividly, and that were both removed. And I've never heard anybody say anything about being removed from their property.
Now that's interesting that you mentioned that, because I would say the vast majority of the 3,000 people that had to leave this area had that same sentiment. Now, some of them did feel that they resented the fact that the government told them what to do and when to do it. But when it come down to the support for the war,
Ray,
I think the whole country was in that kind of support.
Ray,
Yeah, Keith.
You know what you just said about people not liking what the government tells them, some things never change, do they?
That's right.
I mean, it's the same now as it was then.
Yeah.
You're exactly right. And also, Steve, I've hiked those trails out there. I know exactly what you're talking about. I've seen all of those foundations. And that silo, I think, came about after you left. That was where a large beef cattle operation was during the Manhattan Project. And what's left of it is that large silo and some of the feed troughs where you can see where the animals were kept. But
yeah, that's
that Hall Ridge is a really good place. Yeah, they did.
Yeah, most of the family farm is underwater when they built Melton Hill Dam. And my grandfather and I, family history was certainly a passion of both of ours that we worked on together until his death a few years ago. And I heard all the stories. When he was a kid, there was an island there between Bull Run Steam, or the town of Edgemoor, where Bull Run Steam Plant is now. There was an island there, and he used to swim a team of mules, and they would farm that island that was out in the middle of Melton Hill. And and the stories about when the condemnation took place and the War Department came in, and it was obvious that they were going to lose their property. My great grandfather went out and told the farm hands. It was about a 1,500 acre farm.
Wow.
He went out and told them to quit hoeing corn and start cutting logs. And they start cutting logs to build, to take across the river to Edgemoor, where my great grandfather owned the general store and the railroad station and the post office, and kind of the one-stop shop there, and that was in the community of Edgemoor. And they floated logs across there to build a house. Now, the continuation of that story is they lived in Edgemoor, and I still have the railroad sign that was hanging on my great grandfather's railway station. But TVA came along and built a steam plant there where the community of Edgemoor was. So my grandparents had to move again. And now that move, I have heard family members talk about that after moving, being forced out of her home a second time, they kind of felt like that's what killed my great grandmother. Just the stress of moving twice in a very short time. Then they started talking about, how the stress of being relocated from one home to another may have finally taken its toll. I don't hear much about it now, but I did hear about that when I was growing up.
Yeah. Well, I can understand that. And I'm sure it felt like they were being picked on, if nothing less. But the community of Edgemoor, you mentioned that, and I guess this is the first time that I've actually known where that community was. Someone may have said it before, but you've given more information about the hidden history of the town of Edgemoor, or community of Edgemoor, than I've heard before. And I'm glad you've got that railroad depot.
I have more history. I mean, I've got pictures and stuff of my grandfather when he was a little boy floating they were there was a lot of lumber came down the Clinch River before the dams, and him standing there by the old Edgemoor Bridge with the logs being floated down the river. But
Wow.
but my great grandfather was a justice of the peace, so you could go to Edgemoor store and get your mail, get what feed you needed. You could get married. It it was a one-stop shop, and I've heard tons of stories. So Miss Britton, who I'm sure we'll talk about here in a minute, was my great aunt. And she was actually the postmaster there when she was 15 or 16 years old, and driving a Model T Ford to take them to the Scarborough School where Oral is. There was an old school building, and that's where my grandfather and his sisters went to school. But she was actually the postmaster and got robbed one time at the Edgemoor store, and she threw the wallet with the money in it into the grain bin, and they never found it, and went on. So, there are so many stories. I mean, it was kind of the Wild West out there back then. And I'll tell you another great story about the I guess I can tell this one now. Most of the people are gone. But when the government took over the property, a lot of the property owners didn't have time to gather up their cattle. And the cattle were free ranged. I mean, like they did out west, they had a brand or they had a mark on them, and they just wandered around. There were, a lot of grass areas between here and the Cumberland Plateau. Most of it was prairie. And my grandfather didn't, he got his family moved, his home moved. He floated some trees over so they would have lumber to rebuild, but he didn't have a chance to get his cows rounded up. So he came to the Edgemoor Bridge, and he knew the guard. The guard was a local guy. And he said, "Hey, I didn't have a chance to get my cattle rounded up and get them over here. I really need to get them." And the guy said, "Okay, Mr. Jones, go on over and get your cattle, but then, get back here before dark." Well, he got his cattle rounded up, and he was coming back, and there was a different guard on the bridge. And the guard said, "You're going to have to wait up here. I've got to call the MPs." And my grandfather and the other 2 or 3 riders that were riding with him, they actually stampeded the cattle across the bridge back over into Edgemoor, and before the MPs got there. So, there was a lot of that. It wasn't the time of the Wild West, but back in the 30s and 40s, there was still a lot of, there was still a little bit of a wild country around here. Yeah. But they're great stories, great stories. I'm glad to have that history. And it makes me wake up every morning. I have all these family members, the Gallaghers, the Friels, the Joneses, all of them made an additional sacrifice besides sending, men and women to fight the war effort. A lot of them gave up their homes that they'd lived in for 150, 200 years. And so my work now, I kind of come at it from the standpoint of, well, my family made these sacrifices prior to the Manhattan Project and during the Manhattan Project. And I just want to see those sacrifices live up to all the potential that they possibly can. I want to create jobs and opportunity and growth for the area wherever I can help. So that's kind of been of an additional motivation besides just making a living. It's a legacy that I want to carry forward.
So Steve, let me ask you we'll get to the Clinton 12 in a little bit, but tell us, that kind of leads us in. Tell us exactly what you do now.
So I was a city manager in Clinton for 10 years. Yeah. That was when my family moved out of Oak Ridge. They actually went in several different directions, but my grandfather ended up in Clinton after the war and was a dentist. He was mayor. He was chairman of the school board. He was chairman of the Clinton Utility Board for 25 years. My father he doesn't grow strawberries anymore. He's still around, still owns a farm and raises beef cattle. But my parents started a very successful strawberry operation. So I grew up on a farm here in Clinton. So we just moved out of Oak Ridge. We didn't move very far. I joined the military. I was the oldest child on the farm, and I couldn't wait to get off. And wasn't doing all that great in school. Met a wonderful girl, started a family, got married, and joined the military and moved away for some time. And when I moved back, when our kids started getting school age, we made a choice to go ahead and get out of the military, raise our kids here locally where they could be around their grandparents and be in an environment. I mean, everybody's coming to Tennessee now for a reason, and that reason really hasn't changed. It's the best place. Matter of fact, while I was a city manager, Clinton was named the best small town in America to raise a family. But we had always known that and always felt that way, and so we moved back here. And I had a couple of manufacturing companies. I farmed full time for a while. Then an opportunity came up to be city manager in my hometown. And I did that for 10 years and watched the politics go up and down. And eventually you make enough people mad, you need to go do something else. But when I left that, it gave me, it was real interesting. The whole time that I was in Clinton, it was clearly obvious that Clinton was really kind of a bedroom community for Oak Ridge and all the great things going on in Oak Ridge. So early on, I started going to the East Tennessee Economic Council. I got involved in the Tennessee Valley Corridor. As you both know, I really immersed myself in the Oak Ridge community and the things that were going on there because they were so important to Clinton. I mean, when you look at where the money comes from, most people work in Oak Ridge. So we have a very good industrial base on our own, but still the majority of the people that live here work in Oak Ridge or associated with Oak Ridge in some way. So it was just a natural, kind of a natural phase when I left Clinton, when we parted company, which is a much better way of saying that I was fired. We parted company, and within 48 hours, I had calls from Oak Ridge wanting me to help them with economic development and business development and doing a lot of the same things that I'd been doing in Clinton, just do more Oak Ridge centric type work. So now I'm a consultant, and I've done some work for Oak Ridge. I'm currently not working for the city of Oak Ridge, but I do a lot of work for companies in Oak Ridge. Particularly new companies that are looking to move their operations here or establish new operations here, just help them, pull the incentive packages together, help them with local contractors, just make the process, companies are trying to run their companies, and establishing or growing a new facility takes some time. And so I'm still working every day. Every day I wake up, I have a new project, and it's something that makes Oak Ridge a better place to live or creates opportunity for the people that live in our region. And I wake up every day and I just can't wait to go to work. So did I answer your question?
Yes.
I mean, I do some other things. I'm also a Fish and Wildlife Commissioner for the state of Tennessee. I know, Ray, you're still on the Historic Commission, aren't you?
I am, yes.
Yeah,
I'm
so we're
commissioner.
commissioners for the state, one of those unpaid positions that takes up a lot of time, but is really rewarding. And luckily, I've been very fortunate. I've got enough work that I can, participate in some things like that. And again, try to make the world a little bit better than we found it. And that's the kind of thing I do.
All right.
Well, and I'll say you're doing a good job of it, because I can see evidence of your involvement in many of the things that's happening in Oak Ridge now, such as some of the new industry coming into the East Tennessee Technology Park out at the Heritage Center. I know that you've had involvement in that over the past few years, and I think we're on the verge of seeing some major change out there, major increase. I mean, come on, they're going to build an airport. They've got the small modular reactor, maybe even two of them that may be out in that area. And of course, the History Center. Is there more than that?
There may be more. There's so much interest in Oak Ridge right now. I can't, most of it I can't talk about. I'm known for not being able to talk about stuff, but there is so much interest in Oak Ridge. And, I got to tell you, our biggest asset I always say our biggest asset are our people, but there are people everywhere. There's real estate everywhere. Everyone offers incentives, but the kind of technology and partnerships at Oak Ridge National Lab and Y12 and even the environmental management side of things and TVA, those are, nobody else has those. And particularly in the nuclear industry. I know I grew up and you all grew up in a time when we talked about nuclear, we remember climbing under our desks. And, during the middle of the Cold War and nuclear was just associated with weaponry. But now I feel like, and I can attest to the fact that the next generation coming up, they look at nuclear as part of a green energy initiative. It's something that we've got to have. Wind, solar are not going to get it done. If you want to have the kind of things that we enjoy, cell phones and electric cars and all these types, nuclear's got to be a piece of it. And everybody, it doesn't matter what your political affiliation is, everybody recognizes that. And we are the center for that kind of technology in the southeastern U.S. And so it's unbelievable the amount of attention that this whole area, not just Oak Ridge, but the region that we depend on for workers and infrastructure. It's such a big opportunity.
I agree with you, and I think it's just a matter of time before nuclear becomes in the lead again. But and we are at the right place for that. Let's change our tack just a little bit and let you and Keith talk about the time that you worked so closely together to produce one of the most phenomenal recognition of early efforts in desegregation of schools, the Clinton 12. Let's talk about that just a little bit. Keith, you want to start us off by making a little comment about the documentary film and how Steve got you involved?
Well, I remember it was right before Thanksgiving of 2005. I got a phone call, and I don't know if it was Steve or not. It may have been Steve that called me and said,
"It was.
Yeah, we're doing the 50th anniversary celebration of the integration of Clinton High School, and we're going to do a museum. We're going to do some bronze statues, and we want to do a documentary." And I think they had been working with another team, and the other team was, well, I don't remember who they were, so I'll just say that the impression I got is that they were a little arrogant and they knew what they wanted to do, and that wasn't the kind of attitude that the committee needed to work with. And so they asked me to come and meet with them and talk with them. I think somebody had seen, maybe Steve had seen this Secret City film. It had just come out not long before that. And so I did. I met with them and was hired. I was actually working for HP Video. And so the contract, I think, was with HP Video. And during the 9 months or so that the film was being made, I left HP Video, bought HP Video out. And so I ended up finishing the film myself. But it was quite the experience. And I'll tell you this, if it wasn't for Steve Jones, none of that would have ever happened.
Right. Yeah.
None of that would have ever happened. And, he was the driving force between that whole thing. So, and the museum is there today because of the vision that he had and the work that he did, that long ago. So it was the Clinton 12. I always tell people, making the Clinton as a documentary filmmaker, the Clinton 12 will always be my professional legacy. It will be the one film that I can hang my hat on, so to speak, and as a representation of the kind of work that I've done for the last 25 years. It opened doors for me that I never thought would be open, and it's given me recognition as a real professional filmmaker. That's because of Steve.
Yeah, and Steve, I'll let you talk just a second, but I want to mention for Keith that your trip to New York City to get James Earl Jones to do the narration on it was a coup. It was a really good choice you made.
And I'm sure Steve's going to talk about that because he has a bone to pick with me over that trip.
No, you just need to take the photograph out, and I know I'm in the flap. You folded it back like I wasn't even there. There's the bone.
Whenever I've got a photograph that I use regularly of me and James Earl Jones when we went up there. It's because Steve and I went to New York, and Steve was in the photograph. Well, I cut him out of the photograph whenever I posted it. So
I probably would have cut you out too.
Yeah, I know. But anyway.
Such a cool, it was such a cool experience. It really was. There are good times and hard times in any job that you're in. And I'm so thankful to, people. We left on maybe a little bit of a low note, but I was so grateful to the city of Clinton for letting me do a lot of things. One, I got to run with economic development, and we were able to double the industrial tax base, double the sales tax base in the city. And I never would have gotten that opportunity if the city hadn't hired me back in 2000. Just a lot of good things happened the 10 years that I was in, but like Keith, the whole Green Mcadoo experience was like finding a treasure. It was literally like finding a treasure chest, because I had grown up in Clinton, gone to Clinton High School, and I knew that my great uncle, DJ Britton, was principal of the school because he was still around. I knew they'd blown up the high school. Everybody knew that story, and knew that we were one of the first schools to be desegregated. And that was pretty much all that was talked about around here. Early on in my career, I had mentioned the fact that we were coming up on the 50-year anniversary. And when I mentioned it to some of the leadership in the city, they said, no, we just need to leave that one alone. We just need to leave that book closed. So, it was obvious that there was there were still a lot of emotions about the events that happened in Clinton. And it wasn't anything that anybody wanted to stir up. So we had the Green Mcadoo School, which at the time was being utilized for a daycare facility, and it was in disrepair. And we were either going to have to fix it up. The daycare facility had moved out; it was abandoned. We were either going to have to fix it up or demolish it. And so the best thing to do was demolish it. And so I was actually in a council meeting as city manager, and was talking about what to do with this asset that we had in the city that was in really bad repair. And members of the community, former family members, direct family members of the Clinton 12 showed up, and they said, we'd really, there was a lot of history there, and we'd really like to prevent tearing down that facility if we could. And they did that in a public meeting, and the city council looked at me and they said, Mr. Jones, we're giving you a directive to do something with that school. And so there I was. I mean, I'd wanted to do something to begin with, and everybody had kind of frowned on it, but now we were put on the spot. So I met with the group that usually got up there. It wasn't called the Green Mcadoo Cultural Organization then. It was just a group of concerned citizens. And I started listening to the stories. And the fact that I had some family members that were involved as well, and I had my own stories, and I listened to their stories. Again, it was like finding a treasure in your backyard, and it was like this is history that's much bigger than just a local story. This is history that had a profound impact on, I want to say America, but particularly the southeastern United States. I mean, this is a story you don't hear about the southeastern United States. Everybody's focused on the South versus the North and all that history, but this is a good story. This is a good story about Southerners doing the right thing and people coming in from outside trying to do the wrong thing. But Southerners, as a rule, are good, tolerant people, at least in our part of the country. Mm-hmm. So you know, I started planning. There was an election going on. I went to DC a couple times. Then Congressman Wamp put me with Congressman John Lewis, and we talked through several different scenarios and told him what I would like to do, but you know, if I had to settle for something else, I would. We started the discussions with Keith and, you know, these other folks. And then all of a sudden, right in November, first part of December, middle of an election, and it was definitely people that were for the museum versus people that were against the museum. And I was stuck in the middle. I was either going to fall or remain based on that one thing. And right before the election, Senator Frist, who was then majority leader, gave me a call, and he said, "What would you do with $750,000?"
Wow.
And he said, "You know, it's the largest HUD grant in the bill, but you know, we've talked about it. We've seen your enthusiasm. Let's see what you can do on this project." So all of a sudden, the Senate Majority Leader has said, "We're entrusting you with this big grant and this big piece of our history." And we had kind of been going along the lines of, you know, there was an amateur film guy in Oak Ridge that we had been talking to. There was a college in the state of Tennessee that we'd been talking to. And I thought we were going to end up with like I always compared it to a fair exhibit. We're going to end up with a fair exhibit with maybe some video attached to it. But we got that money, and I think the credibility that getting that grant got us through the election. So everybody that we needed to win won. And I'm just going to say right now, there was divine intervention in this whole thing since day one. The fact that we got that big grant from Congress, the fact that the election was won, and people that won were people that were supporters of Green Mcadoo, the desegregation history that went on here, and then everything that happened thereafter. There's no way a project manager like myself could have got all that done without having some degree of divine intervention. I'm telling you. So we got the money. We had the right people in place. There were some things that happened during the election, right before the election, and I'll tell this story. And so the mayor and I were walking up the steps of City Hall. We had been talking about the Green Mcadoo project. It was a topic of discussion during the election. And of course, I had heard the story about the elections during the Green the desegregation and beating up Reverend Turner and all these stories. I'd heard all those stories, but it was a cold day. I mean, I had my coat on, and the mayor and I were walking across the street, going into City Hall, in a pickup truck had 3 old guys in it. And I knew all 3 of them. They're all gone now, but they pulled up to me and rolled down the window, and they said, "Well, Jones, it looks like you're taking good care of the niggers, and we're getting ready to take good care of you in this election. What do you think about that?" And I said, "I think y'all are a little bit too old to be talking to me like that, and you just need to move on down the road." And it absolutely made me so mad. It made me so mad. And I went and sat in the office, and Mayor Shootman, who was mayor at the time, he sat across in front of me, and he looked at me. He said, "Well, what are we going to do?" And I said, "We are going to do the best dadgum job at telling this story one way or the." I mean, it was a turning point that we were going to do everything right to make this a world-class museum and create all the things that support it. If we lost the election, we wouldn't be able to do it, but if we won, we were going to do it right. And we ended up next week, we won the election, and between really Christmas and New Year's, I made a list of the things that we really needed to do for this museum. One was the building and rehabilitation of the building, creating a museum within the building, the rest of the Green Mcadoo board, which had been formed by then, felt like that we needed to do statues of the 12 students. And then probably the most important thing was document. We had 11 of the 12 students still living, but capture their stories, not just create a documentary, which Keith did a beautiful job with, not just create a documentary, but capture their living testimony about the events that happened then, because nobody had really done that. I mean, Time Life, you know, publications from around the world had documented what had happened in Clinton, but nobody had really caught that Black perspective. And Keith did that so well and created a documentary that was so well. But here's where the divine intervention kicks in. So museum designers, I talked to the top 10 designers in the world, and all of them but one wanted $1 million just to start off with. That was the number, won $1 million, except one, this guy named Jerry Eisterhold out in Kansas City, Missouri, who has done so many civil rights museums. And he and Ben Lawless, who actually ran the Smithsonian for 25 years and was, you know, I guess he built the Air and Space Museum and the African American Museum of Art History, Museum of U.S. History, was his partner. They traveled in about 2 days before Christmas and met with me, and we went and walked through the story. And we were having lunch at the Mexican restaurant in Clinton. That was the only place that you could really eat 2 days before Christmas. And I said, so what do you think? And Ben Lawless, who was in his 80s by then, who was, you know, one of the premier museum designers in the world, he looked at me and he said, we've always looked, my whole career, I've been looking for a community that had a big story to tell and, you know, with limited resources, and we found it. And we're going to do your museum. And they worked with us from day one. Found a good small contractor who had an attachment to Clinton. Like Rogers Group donated all the paving and a lot of the earthwork and stuff. I mean, people in the community really stepped up to put this story together. And then, of course, the statues, I contacted all these folks that did statues, and the bronze life-size statues are expensive. And so they were anywhere from $6.5 million to $2.5 million. They were put on the back burner. And then all of a sudden, right when about January, February, when everything was being pulled together, I got a call from an artist in Maryland, and he said, you know, I've been thinking about this, and they had been $2.5 million or something. He said, I've been thinking about this, and I think that this is an important piece of art that I can hang my hat on, that will be my legacy, like Keith was talking about earlier. And he said, I'm going to do those statues for $500,000. So, and then we talked to Keith, and by then the Secret City were out, and the quality of the Secret City was so good and was put together so well. And working with Keith was so good. All of a sudden we had all of our partners that we couldn't have done any of this project without any, we just had the perfect partner for each thing. And we broke ground in February 2006 on this project. Had only gotten funding less than 90 days prior. I had pushed City Council to borrow some additional funds to finish the project out, you know, letting them know that I would continue to go after grant money and funding in other places to pay it off, do the best I could. But that we owed this history was so important to Clinton. It's what really makes Clinton unique. And got a unanimous, there was one dissenting vote when we got the package put together. And all that happened between Christmas and February. In the first part of February, we had a groundbreaking ceremony for the museum. And it's amazing to me that 6 months later, we cut the ribbon, opened the museum. You had the documentary ready. We had the premiere in Clinton. We had the museum, everything was done on that museum, on that project, with the exception of the statues, in 6 months. Now, you tell me there wasn't any divine intervention. I mean, it is the task when I look back. And granted, I worked, Keith worked. There were a lot of people that were working on that project almost full time in addition to our day jobs. But the fact that it came together so well, and the story is told so well, and the museum, I think, is world class for a small museum. Everything came together so well in such a short period of time. It's amazing to me. It's been great for my reputation, but I couldn't have done anything without all those different parties being involved and participating. Just the right people at the right time. I've gone on too long.
No, you've done fine. You brought
You can
out
tell I'm still passionate about it.
yes.
So,
and rightly so.
And in the end, Governor Bredesen was governor at the time, and I remember going to see him and his chief of staff and making a presentation. They picked up the tab on the statues. So we had the federal government picking up the tab on the building and the rehabilitation of a National Historic Site. The governor kicked in on the statues, and it's the largest collection of life-size bronze statues outside in the United States. We had donations. I've mentioned just a few of them, and if I started trying to mention everybody, I would miss something. But the museum, and the people that were involved in the museum, and we're still finding stuff that we couldn't find. And Keith's ability to get people to talk to him. I mean, I'm going into the Clinton 12 now, Keith, but
Okay.
it was so hard to get people comfortable enough to talk to anybody about that time in history. And not just members of the Black community, but there were members of the white community that had participated. Reverend Turner's wife, for example. I mean, I had to go visit her in Nashville 3 times to get her comfortable enough to talk about the events that had happened to her in the 50s. They were so, the impact that it had on a lot of lives is so dramatic. That's hard to capture in a documentary or anywhere else, but it was clearly obvious. I mean, it's my own personal history. My family, my father in particular was very close to Uncle DJ. He and my Aunt Clarice never had any kids, so he and my Uncle DJ went fishing all the time. But it affected him. I mean, he was one person prior to desegregation, and he became this whole other person after desegregation. And that's probably material for a book someday. And there was some stuff that we could have put in the documentary that, because there were so many people that were still alive, we didn't really touch on it out of respect to the families. But I felt like, when we had the premiere of that documentary and the students came, and it was, people lined the red carpet going across the street until the students got to come in. And all of them, the last time they had been in that theater, they had to sit upstairs because the community was desegregated. But when we were walking out, and you had the students and their families, and you had people that may have been in the National Guard when Clinton was under martial law for a while, or when you had people that were involved in the education system that had to deal with that. But when people were walking out going, that captured everything. That's the way we remember it. And it wasn't, and it was balanced. I mean, it told the Black story and the white story just the way that they remembered it. That's an accomplishment, Keith. I mean, I can't think of a better, for somebody that does documentaries, I can't think of a better compliment than the compliments that we received from the people that were actually in the documentary when the documentary was played the first time.
And I remember so clearly that evening, and I walked out and I was waiting to talk to some folks, and I don't remember who it was, but if somebody that was involved in the story, and they came up to me and said, because I didn't know how they were going to react. When I was making the film, it was a balancing act. I knew there were 2 stories to tell. there was the story from the Black perspective and there was the story from the white perspective. And I knew both of those were important stories, and I tried to balance and tell it. But I had one of them come up to me afterwards and said, well, that's exactly the way it was. And I thought that was the best compliment that I could have, is that it had that the story had integrity, and then it reflected the real history of what happened there. Yeah, it was. But you got to remember too, there was some hesitancy, and Steve and I'm not sure we've ever really talked about this, but here I am. I'm this white guy from the South who's trying to tell one of the greatest civil rights stories in our history for the South, for the region. And I'm not so sure that, especially at the beginning, that there was the kind of confidence in me to be able to do that as a white person. I think that turned somewhat when I finished the script and they read the script and saw that, because that's what I did, is I finished the script and then they read it before I finished the film for any changes or additions. And I think that turned at that point a little bit. They had a little bit more confidence that I was going to be able to tell their story, that I was entrusted with their story, and that I would take care in telling their story. So.
And the participants did the students particularly, there was none of this. It wasn't a dramatic, they just told their story the way that it was. And it wasn't, there was no agenda. It was just their story. And they were so gracious and I wish everybody could have known them as ambassadors to race relations in the South. Because I thought they just did a phenomenal job. I wish this should have gone further than it did. It really, in my opinion, it really should have. But it went farther than I thought it would go. So
I remember, Steve, there was, and I don't remember his name, but I'll tell you a funny story. When I not only interviewed the students, the 11 surviving students, and then Marilyn, who was the sister of the one that had passed away, but I also interviewed some of the other students, some of the white students that attended, like Jerry Shattuck, for example. And Steve came to me, and there was a city council member that had been a student when those events took place, and he said, I think it would be a good idea for you to interview him, for you to include him. Said he's sort of on the fence a little bit about whether to support it or not. And I was like, all right, here we go. We got politics playing into this, but Steve was the boss. So I set it up and I interviewed this guy, and I didn't know what I was going to get. And it is by far, his interview made it into the film. And it's by far, to me, one of the most touching and meaningful moments of the film.
It is.
Because, he talked about being a student when they bombed the school and how that affected him. And he teared up. He was this kind of tough looking, guy.
Yeah.
And he got emotional about talking about it. So you just never know what you're going to get when you sit down and talk with these people. And like Steve talked about, the members of the Clinton 12, a number of them had never even told their family about their experience when they were teenagers. This was the first time they were really opening up about it. It was a real, it was a real gift for me as a filmmaker to be able to do this. It really was.
Well, and that's not even including James Earl Jones.
That's
and
exactly
spending a
right.
day with him in New York. So I'll tell you, I know we've got a limited amount of time, but I'll tell you, so there's a part in the documentary I cannot get through without getting choked up. And that's the part where the rivalry, but Jerry Shattuck tells the story of the rivalry between Clinton and Oak Ridge. And when the school was bombed, and those, I don't want to give away the story, but the events that happened right there.
Mm-hmm.
The way he tells the story and the way you portray it in the documentary, that's to me, what tells the story of the relationship between Clinton and Oak Ridge, and the way it should be everywhere in America. I mean, that is such an American way of, do away with all the social media and all the politics. That story right there, that is America right there. And I can't get through it without, I can't talk about it right now. The way that Clinton and Oak Ridge came to each other's needs is, watch the documentary. And if you have a dry eye at the end of the story, when they take the Clinton students to Oak Ridge, if you have a dry eye, particularly if you live around here, there's something wrong with you.
I made the movie and I've watched it hundreds of times, and I still get a little misty when that scene comes on, because
oh my gosh,
powerful scene. So Steve, well, thank you so much for being with us.
We might have to do a part two.
We might have to do a part two. And I will tell this about the James Earl Jones story. And that's another thing. You talk about divine intervention.
Divine intervention. Yep.
I had, it was June. I think it was June. The film was going to premiere in August. I didn't have a narrator, and I'd been working
6 weeks prior to the premiere.
I had
6 weeks before the premiere.
So yep. I had been trying to find somebody with a recognizable voice. I wanted an African-American male who was probably close to that age. And anyway, it all worked out to where I called James Earl Jones' agent. And this was on a Friday. This was on a Wednesday. I called on a Wednesday, sent the script. Friday morning, the agent called me back, said, Mr. Jones has agreed to do this. These are the conditions. It's got to do this. It's got to do that. And he can do it on Wednesday. This was Friday. And so I called Steve, and it was about $10,000 or $15,000 more than we had in the budget for it. And I called Steve, and I said, Steve, we can get James Earl Jones to narrate. I said, do you want James Earl Jones to narrate our film? And he said, yeah. I said, well, it's going to cost this amount of money. And I said, and I don't have time for you to go talk to a committee and get permission. I said, if you want it, I got to make it happen today. And he says, make it happen. And I said, well, we've got to go to New York on Wednesday to record him. He said, well, I'm going with you. He says, I'll work on the plane tickets. You work on the contract with James Earl Jones. So that Tuesday evening, about 7:30 or 8, I think I faxed the last signed contract. And he and I got on a plane about 6 o'clock on Wednesday. We flew to Newark, took a train into New York, spent the afternoon with James Earl Jones recording him, and was back in Knoxville by about 10 or 11 o'clock that night.
And I had a check in my pocket for him.
Yeah. It was an amazing experience. And he walked in, and the first thing he said was, do you have some place I can put my lunch? He brought his lunch with him. And because he's old now, but he was older then, probably in his late 70s, early 80s maybe. But anyway, we would work for a little while, and then we would take a break. And Steve remembers this. We were talking. He said he was talking about this little film I did in Iowa. He said, yeah, we did a little film called The Field of Dreams, And so we just chatted with him all afternoon. He was like somebody's grandfather. He was great. He was so gracious.
So many times you run into celebrities and you just wish I hadn't met them, because my opinion is just not, and I won't mention any people that saw the film, but he was not one of those guys, one of the most gracious, down to earth. You could sit there at the breakfast table and have a conversation. Just a fantastic person. Just not only is a great actor, but I could hang out with him forever. He was just a good, down to earth person. And did this film for the right reasons. He usually gets, I can tell what the numbers are. He usually gets $250,000 back then to do a documentary. And he loved our story and did it for us for $25,000.
Yeah, and the agent told me, he says he doesn't
So-
usually open his mouth for less than 100, less than $100,000.
No.
So yeah, he was
Yeah.
great. He was great to do it. And it was a wonderful experience. That's just the icing on the cake for the Clinton 12 for me, is to be able to have that experience. But anyway, all right.
Well, let me, Keith,
ahead.
let me say this. I think it has been a wonderful opportunity for you and Steve to reminisce about something that really and truly is very important, not just to this area, but the Clinton 12 is now being seen in the schools across the state and the nation. It's been on public television. It's available on YouTube. I think it's the legacy is going to live on, and to a large extent because of the quality and the skill put into producing that documentary. Now, Green Mcadoo itself, you have to go there and experience that, and everyone should consider that at some point. But the film is out there in the public domain now. People can see that, and Steve, I believe you're right about divine intervention. It was meant to be. You were in the right place at the right time, and you hired Keith, and you all made a wonderful, wonderful team. Plus many other people that worked on it with you, as you said. But you've really brought us some good hidden history today that I don't think people really knew the extent of what took place to make that Clinton 12 and that desegregation story that really needed to be told, and told well. And you've done that.
Thanks, Ray. And I have to give a little plug to you. You're on the State Historic Commission. Green Mcadoo is now a state museum.
Yeah, right.
Funded by the state of Tennessee, one of, I guess, 4 across the state.
That's correct. Yes.
So,
And
yeah,
appropriately so.
come out and see it. Watch the documentary and come learn about what Southerners are really like.
That's exactly right. All right. Well, thank you, Steve. Thank you, Ray. Ray, who do we have? We're going to take a couple of months off, and I mentioned this last time because I've got a film festival coming up in a couple of months, and that usually takes a little bit of my time. So for the people that are interested in that, I'll go ahead and plug the Knoxville Film Festival. This will be the 18th year of this film festival. It was originally the Secret City Film Festival in Oak Ridge. About 9 years ago, we moved to Knoxville to a movie theater and rebranded it as the Knoxville Film Festival. It is September the 16th through the 19th this year at Regal Downtown West Cinema 8. I am in the thick of the films, the selections, and we will be showing about 90 films over the course of those 4 days at the film festival. So there's a lot of work to do there. So we're going to take people can learn more about it at knoxfilmfest.com. But we're going to take a couple of months off and until the festival's over. It'll be late September when we're back. But I think you've already got a guest lined up for that.
I do. Yeah, yes, Keith. And I think we have to recognize we've been doing this long enough now that we have over 30 programs, and they're all available on a Facebook page and on your YouTube channel for people to just look for hidden history, and you're going to find it. But I think it's appropriate that we take a break here and give you the time to do justice to the film festival. It's a great festival. It's grown tremendously since it was the Secret City Festival. You just outgrew the area that we had here, and the Knoxville area. Knoxville and Oak Ridge area is just a tremendous area for filming. I mean, there's a lot of that that's taking place, and you have contributed significantly to that growth. So it's appropriate to give you that time. We will come back near the end of September, and we'll bring Carolyn Krause in to talk. She was for 25 years the editor of the Oak Ridge National Laboratories Review publication, and she helps to write historically speaking columns for me. Then I really do appreciate the research that she does. And then we've got also Jim Dotson, who is a city councilman, art teacher at Jefferson Junior High. And he has been substantially in the lead in bringing some art into the city of Oak Ridge. And the latest thing that he's been engaged in are the murals. that we have, and even more to come, maybe. So we'll let him talk about that. And a guest that I'm so proud to be able to get later on this year is going to be General Groves' grandson, Dick Groves. He has agreed to come and talk to us. We just need to make arrangements for when he can do that. He's in Europe, but we, because of this technology that's come out of the pandemic, this Zoom thing, we're able to reach out to him too. So finally, let me say again, Steve, we really do appreciate you and all you do for the city of Oak Ridge, and a great friendship. We just have enjoyed one another for years and hope to continue doing that. So thank you all for watching.
All right, folks, thanks for watching.
Thank you.
We'll be back in a little while. Thank you.